self-care isn't selfish. It isn't something that is self-centered or even optional. It was something that I had to come to grips with to say, this is necessary. Just like I take care of people as a mom and as a wife and at my job, I also need to take care of myself. And feeling okay about that, feeling confident in saying self-care is really necessary. It's how we maintain ourselves.
Hello and welcome to Stories of Legacy. We are so honored to have one of my longest, dearest friends with us today, and she's going to share her story. It's a story that is inspiring to me, and I know it's going to be inspiring to you. So let's begin. Claire, can you share your story with us? Who you are? Tell us about yourself first.
I'm Claire Montenegro. I'm 35 years old. I've been married for 10 years to Omar, and we have two boys that are 5 and 6 years old.
And what is your work, Claire?
I am a pastor at a local church.
One area that we wanted to cover today is about anxiety and depression. That's something that you have struggled with, and it's something that when I first met you, I would never have guessed that it's something that you would struggle with. And looking at you from the outside, the joyful person that you are, I wouldn't guess that, which may be pretty common if you have struggled or you know somebody that struggled with anxiety or depression. But Claire, can you just share with us your journey now, and maybe when did you start to see signs of anxiety and depression, and we can go from there. So let's start at the beginning, when you first saw these signs of anxiety and depression in your life.
Yeah, so I was raised in a home that was loving and supportive, and I was able to, as a teenager, just enjoy life, and I led a pretty normal childhood, and so I wasn't aware that I struggled with depression and anxiety until I was an adult. So as I got older and life became more challenging, having to juggle a full-time job and also navigate the waters of marriage and then parenthood, I began to notice that I was showing signs of what I thought was depression and anxiety. So I started to really start observing myself and understanding what my patterns were to process things that were challenging, a situation or a relationship. And I noticed that I compared myself to others and realized I don't think that I'm quite processing things in a normal way. And so I started therapy, and it was there that I discovered that I really did struggle with both anxiety and depression. So during that time, I began learning about what anxiety and depression really was. And I did a lot of reading and a lot of searching and praying and talking with other people so that I could start understanding what these two things were. I tend to be a really happy, joyful person, and it didn't occur to me that I could be both of those things. I could be both happy, joyful, and then also sad and depressed and anxious all at the same time. Emotions are very complex, and so it took a long time to start learning about them. And again, it was really in therapy that I learned that was really what the core of my struggles were. Once I identified that made things a lot easier, honestly, so that I could begin to learn, begin to heal, begin to develop strategies that help me navigate the days that were really challenging, the situations that were really challenging, the relationships that are really challenging, but not lose myself in that, so that I could continue to be joyful, I could continue to be happy. I really enjoy being around a lot of people. I'm very extroverted, and so I was able to incorporate those things as I learned how to navigate the anxiety and depression. And so once I started learning about them, I was able to look back on my life as a teenager, even before I was a teenager, and honestly see signs in myself that were probably depression and anxiety. I just wasn't aware. And so I'm thankful that at this point, at least in my life, that I've learned so much about it, so that I can really live a much fuller life and learn from my past experiences to move forward and also teach others and help others too.
That's really great to hear that you have learned how to cope, how to work through the anxiety and the depression, and also to recognize it. What would you suggest for somebody else maybe that they think that they're struggling with anxiety and depression, but how would you be able to identify for yourself? What would you suggest somebody do?
So some of the signs that I've learned about myself are, when it comes specifically to depression, I've had to really do some learning to separate what those two things are. Depression and anxiety can often present together, but they are different. And so it's been helpful for me to distinguish what those differences are. And specifically with depression, that was the area that I leaned into first. And so a few years ago, I probably hit a decent size low, as I would call it, and I found myself in a pattern of sluggishness, of maybe some would call it laziness. I really noticed it took its toll in my personal life. So I wasn't seeing it at work. I was seeing it at home, where I would let chores pile up. I would let just the things that I needed to do on a daily basis not be done. And it was very gradual and subtle. And I think that I was also combating what our culture today would say. And our culture sometimes would tell us to, as parents especially, to just be entitled or feel this sense of entitlement of, well, you work hard and you have a marriage and you're a parent, and so because of all these things that you're juggling, you deserve a break, you deserve this, or you deserve that. And so I bought into that, and so that really helped enable my depression. And so when I began treating it and began my therapy and to understand what this depression looked like for me, that was when I started to list out what I'd call my symptoms. And so even now, as I still continue to manage this, it isn't something that goes away. It isn't something that is cured or disappears. But I've learned to identify when I might be falling into a depressive state a lot faster. And so for me, a lot of it comes at home. And so if I notice I'm getting behind in things, then that's a pretty good telltale sign that that there's some emotions that need to be dealt with, and I need to lean into that. When it comes to anxiety, that's something I've learned about a lot more recently. And so a lot of it actually manifested itself in my work. And so at first, I knew I was struggling. I knew things weren't quite right. But because I had learned what my symptoms were for depression, I had this sense that things were going well when they really weren't. And so with my anxiety, I'm able to see that present itself when I'm isolating myself. So what I mean by that is when I'm working, and a lot of what I do as a pastor is host people in our church for services, but then we've got a few days each week where we build relationships through email, phone. There's a long task list. And so I found that if I'm isolating myself and I'm ignoring a task that I'm just dreading, that brings about anxiety, that has become a symptom that I've been able to recognize. And so it's very different than the depression. It is more so very much avoiding something that makes me really uncomfortable, something I don't want to deal with, a conversation I don't want to have. And so that's what I've learned so far about my anxiety.
Okay, that's really insightful. And how would you say you've learned to cope? So therapy is one way that you learn to recognize the symptoms, but I assume it also helps you cope. And can you tell us a little bit about your process in therapy and how that helps you cope, and other coping techniques that you have learned as well with both depression and anxiety?
Yeah, so I have found that for me, what has worked is a variety of coping strategies. And so I've mentioned therapy a few times. Therapy has been really helpful for me. I am, as I mentioned, very extroverted. So I'm a verbal processor. I often don't even know what I'm thinking or feeling until I've had a conversation about it and I've said it out loud. I can hear myself process it. So talk therapy is really helpful for me, where I'm able to sit down with somebody who's disconnected from my life, who doesn't have a bias, who is a healthy person and can encourage me and not lead me down the path of entitlement. And so that's been really helpful. I also take medication. I am on an antidepressant and an anxiety medication, which doesn't cure everything. It doesn't remove the feelings that I have, but it does take the edge off so that I'm able to be of sound mind and can then help myself process through things and really deal with situations head on. I also pray a lot, and God has been a huge part of my therapy, I guess I would call it, because it's through Him, through finding strength in my faith, that I'm able to really handle things that I'm not even strong enough to handle at times. And then I also surround myself with a handful of people that are trustworthy, that are healthy, that are like-minded, that I'm able to process through things as well, to rely on them and my husband, all the close relationships that I have. I let them know what my symptoms are. I let them know what I'm struggling with so that I'm not isolated, so that I know that I'm not alone, that people have my back, and that I can lean on them when I need somebody to pray with me, to send me a scripture that will lift me up, something like that. And then also, I've become really fascinated with bullet journaling, and it's this way of basically writing my entire life in a notebook. So it would be my calendar, my planner, my diary, my journal. I list even my symptoms there. I list things that have been found to help me at times that are difficult. And then I use it for all other kinds of things like Christmas shopping and just fun things that we have planned for our family. It's all in one place. And I found that it's really helpful when I'm feeling anxious to get all the thoughts out of my head onto paper, whether it needs to be scheduled or it needs to be written down. And it's been really helpful for me especially with anxiety, as I feel anxious. It really helps me to just empty my brain and write it all down on a piece of paper so that I literally can close the cover, set it aside, and kind of move forward. So those are a lot of really big ways.
That's really great. Now, a question I have is, when you first found out that you're struggling with anxiety and depression, what were your initial thoughts? What were your initial reactions to the idea that this is something that you could be struggling with?
So some of my initial thoughts when I first entertained the ideas of having anxiety and depression, I would say right off the bat were no, denial. That can't be. I'm a joyful person. I'm happy. I have nothing to complain about. My life is amazing. And so there is no way that I could have depression or anxiety. Another thought I had early on was that I wasn't allowed to have struggles that way. I was raised in a setting where those things just don't exist. And so either mental health or mental unhealth in this case is linked to a reason. There's something wrong. There's something I've done wrong that has led to this mental state that I have. And so, excuse me, a lot of it has been really just giving myself permission to understand that mental health is just like our physical health. And so it takes time, it takes effort, it takes planning to keep ourselves physically healthy. The same is true mentally. And so we don't necessarily just right off the bat as a human being have perfect mental health. That isn't something that is really attainable just without little effort. And so it was really giving myself grace at the beginning to entertain those ideas. Maybe this is something that I struggle with. Maybe it is not connected to something that I've done. I'm not wrong, But it just is. It just is. And I remember there's a workbook I worked through with my therapist specifically for anxiety. And the very first chapter was about acceptance. I accept that I have anxiety. I accept that I have depression, and they may never go away, but I can lead a really incredible life anyway if I can learn about them. And so it was giving myself grace. It was giving myself permission early on to really start wrapping my mind around this so that I could then begin my journey to health.
I think that's really good points that you make. No matter what we might be struggling with, it's important to accept, and it's important to recognize that it's okay to have something wrong or to have something that we need to work on. So that's a really good point and something that we all can learn from and take in our lives. Another question that we have, Claire, is what do you feel that, how does it affect your family life as well? So you said you saw it mostly in your personal life with depression. So how did that affect your ability as a wife and as a mother? How did it affect your relationships?
So when I first discovered that I was really struggling with depression and I was seeing it manifested at home, I immediately felt extremely guilty. So not only was I battling these really negative thoughts of sadness, hopelessness, but then I had a lump on their guilt because so many people rely on me as a wife, as a mom, and I felt horrible. I felt like, how could I let this get in the way? How could I be this selfish? How could I be this self-centered and just think about what I need? And what I needed to do was become a student of myself, but then I needed to share my findings with my husband so that we could work as a team, because he isn't a mind reader. I don't know about yours, but mine isn't. And I was able to find ways to communicate with him you know, what I'm feeling inside, what I'm thinking inside, what my day is looking like. Can you hold me accountable to this? Here's what I'd like to do today. I'm telling you so that way I know that you will be looking for me to do it, or whatever the case is. And so I found that just as much as I had to start processing myself, I had to also include my husband in that, so that together we could run our household. And he was able to be strong when I wasn't. He was able to be a tough love at times when I needed it, to say, hey, I know you're not feeling the greatest, but here's what we need to do today. And so including him in that has been really helpful. And again, anytime you hear somebody talk about marriage, it all boils down to communication, and this situation is no different. And I had to both ride a balance of grace, but then tough love as well. And so I was able to focus on the things that were most important and really prioritize, to say, if I only have the emotional and mental energy today to do these 10 things, I'm going to prioritize them. So that way it really took the edge off of my guilt as a mom, to make sure my kids were taken care of, make sure all of their needs were met, even if I wasn't meeting my own needs. That way I was able to find the inner strength to do that, to keep things moving forward. And then as I was able to do that more and more, I was then able to make my task list longer and include care for myself too. It's impossible to give when you're empty. It's impossible to lead when you're feeling that way. And so I was able to also include myself in care and realize that self-care isn't selfish. It isn't something that is self-centered or even optional. It was something that I had to come to grips with, to say, this is necessary. Just like I take care of people as a mom and as a wife and at my job, I also need to take care of myself, and feeling okay about that, feeling confident in saying self-care is really necessary. It's how we maintain ourselves, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally, spiritually. All the different facets of our being stems from that self-care, and nobody's going to do that for me, which is another big thing I had to learn. I can't rely on other people to do that for me. It's something that I had to find a way to do for myself.
That's so important, self-care. And I think that's something that we all, maybe especially women, have to learn. So Claire, do you have 3 tips that you can give to us that would help us in self-care? What are ways that you have found that help you in self-care?
I would say the 3 top ways for me that's been really impactful in self-care is to A, give myself permission to do so, communicate with my husband, make time on the schedule. And so A, just making it happen. And then B, having to be a student of myself to find the things that truly recharge my batteries, make me feel full again. For me, it's often coffee with a friend to sit and chat and not have to be divided at the moment, have an hour of some really concentrated time with a friend. Is really helpful for me. But then C, I would say make it a regular occurrence. Understand that if you recharge your batteries and you take care of yourself, maybe it's a haircut, maybe it's a pedicure, maybe it's time with friends like me, but it needs to happen on a regular basis. It's part of what makes us us. And just like we need to eat every day, just like we need to sleep every day, this is something that I make sure I put on my calendar at least once or twice a month. I would say weekly is ideal. I know it can get busy, but at least once or twice a month is really important to do something for yourself that recharges your batteries.
Awesome. Thank you, Claire. Okay, now to wrap this up, we just have one more question. And you've given us a lot of advice, a lot of tips already. Can you wrap it up as well in 3 pieces of advice that you give to somebody that maybe they've just found out that they're struggling with depression or anxiety or both? What would you say? 3 things top of mind. How would you encourage them right now?
I would say that above and beyond anything else, you need to be kind to yourself, patient and gentle. That's what's really important, especially at the beginning, to help you understand that you are valuable and you are worthy of this dive deeper into who you are. And so be kind and gentle and patient with yourself. And then secondly, be a student of yourself. Learn what makes you tick. Learn what things would be considered triggers, things that are symptoms of maybe a bad mental state. And then also learn about the things that boost you, the things that bring you out of those days, those moments, those thoughts, whatever that is getting you down or making you anxious. And then lastly, I would say to build a support system. It's going to take more than just you to begin to understand this journey you're walking on and to make it out and find a more balanced, more full life on the other end. And so build your support system. Get those people on your team you can trust, that you can reach out to on really good days, on really bad days, and they're your team to help you walk this journey.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Claire, for sharing your story, your heart, your life, and we look forward to hearing more as well in the future. Stay tuned.